Do students read in your classroom? And what do they do with the reading? In this episode, I speak with Jennifer Degenhardt and Theresa Marrama. They are both authors of CI novels that I have personally used in my French and Spanish classrooms. I thought I'd go right to the source when thinking about the many ways that we can engage our students in target language reading. Jennifer and Theresa share their writing process, inspiration for their stories, along with ideas for getting the most out of a comprehensible novel. So let's jump in. Are you a language teacher looking for some reassurance that what you're doing in the classroom is on the right track? Or maybe you're looking for some ways to teach even more effectively. If you're one or the other or somewhere in between, you've landed in the right place. This is the World Language Classroom Podcast with your host, me, Joshua Cabral. You're about to get tips, tools, and resources so that your students continue to rise in proficiency and communicate with confidence. Let's jump in. Vamos, allons-y. Hello, my friends. Bonjour, mes amis. Hola, mis amigos. Welcome to the World Language Classroom Podcast. I am Joshua Cabral, and thank you, as always, for taking the time out of your week to listen to a podcast about language teaching. Because you know what that makes you, right? It makes you an incredible language teacher for going just that extra mile every time. So thank you so much for doing that. Today is a special day for me. I am a huge fan of using stories, and by using stories, I'm talking about making language comprehensible and interesting and intriguing and compelling for students. And one way of doing that is through CI novels, comprehensible input novels. And so joining me today are two authors who have written many novels, CI novels for students in French and Spanish, although they're translated into other languages as well. And these two authors are Jennifer Degenhardt and Theresa Marrama. If you are using CI novels in your classroom, if you look at the authors of them, you probably have some of their books in your classroom. So this is a huge moment for me to be able to talk to the authors of the book that I actually use with my students to see what their intentions are for these books, why write them, and what can students be doing with them. So separately, they're known as Jennifer Degenhardt, also aka Puentes Language, and then Theresa Marrama is known as Compelling Language Corner on the internet as well. So if you have seen their websites, their blog posts, and on social media, you know that they have so much to contribute. So I just want to stop talking about them and bring them into the conversation so that we can have fun with this. So Theresa and Jennifer, or Terry and Jen, as we were talking about earlier, but I know them as Theresa and Jennifer, so that's what we're going with for today. But Theresa and Jennifer, thank you so much for being here today.
Thanks for having us, Joshua. So great to be with you.
Thank you for having us. We're very excited, Joshua.
Jennifer Degenhardt, this is the second time for you on the podcast.
Yes, it's the second time, and I'm even happier to be here now with both of you, with you, Joshua, and with my business partner, Theresa Marrama.
So just a little side note, I was at my State Language Association conference last year, and I was in an elevator, and there was this woman on the elevator, and so I said, "Oh, are you going to the conference?" And she said, "Oh, I'm actually an exhibitor here at the conference." And I looked at her name tag and I saw that it was Theresa Marrama, and I was like, oh my God, I teach her books in my classroom. You know, it's just like one of those things that happens at a conference. So that was so much fun. Jennifer Degenhardt is in Connecticut and Theresa Marrama is in New York. And Theresa is primarily a French teacher and Jennifer Degenhardt is a Spanish teacher, also at the college level as well. Let's start talking about using these CI novels in our classrooms. So before we talk about the kind of the nitty gritty of what you can do, Theresa, let's start with you. And can you just sort of talk to us about what we mean when we say a CI novel or a comprehensible input novel, and why are these valuable for our students?
So comprehensible novels, or CI novels, comprehensible input novels, are books that are written especially for second language learners. They're written with limited vocabulary by the authors, specifically with repetition in mind, repeated vocabulary, expressions throughout, and all of the comprehensible input novels now, I know most of them anyway, I can speak for Jennifer's and my own, I have comprehensive glossaries of all the words that are in the story so that students have that ease of reading.
And so how should teachers be using these in the classroom? So Jennifer, I'll come to you for this one. Even if I have a textbook I have to follow, so how do we bring one of these comprehensible input novels into our classroom?
The comprehensible novel can be in addition to what's going on in the textbook. And how I use it with my students is as the basis for the curriculum, meaning, whatever I want to do, either thematically, grammatically, economically, socially, whatever it is, I take from the book. The book and the plot of the book is what ties everything together. So it's kind of like a reminder each day. So what's going on in the story? So that's a little bit of a warm up, right? I always thought that math teachers had it made, review the homework, teach a new concept, start the homework. And you can do this with a comprehensible novel, just using it as the background. Students in my classes especially, they all think that they're supposed to be really academic in college, but students love the fact that they can access the language with the comprehensive glossaries that are in the back of the book, right? So they don't have to go to their device. They can just quickly go to the back of the book. If I were to recommend something for teachers, I would do the class novel together. So there's a little bit more control. Teachers seem to like that a little bit more.
Theresa, let's talk a little bit about your inspiration. Like, why did you start writing these novels and where do your ideas come from?
I wrote my first novel, I think it was 2017. And this is how it all kind of unraveled. I'm the only French teacher in my high school / middle school, right? Very small rural school in upstate New York. And I teach alongside one other Spanish teacher. So there's Spanish and French in my school. And we hadn't used novels at all as a department back in 2017. So I said, I think I'm going to try and teach a novel. And my colleague was like, okay, have you ever taught a novel? I said, no, and I don't even know which one to teach. I don't know where to start. I taught my first novel. It was a CI novel that was already out. And my students did a nice job. I was very impressed with what they were able to produce when we were finished reading it and just the engagement that they got with the discussions we had in class. And I thought, I think we need more readers in French. There just wasn't a huge option. And here I'm sitting alongside my colleague who has all these titles in Spanish. And I'm like, well, that's not fair. So she made the suggestion, why don't you write your own book? You could use it with your kiddos. And I said, well, where would I even start? So anyways, that's where the whole idea stemmed from. And I wrote my first novel. And it was published. And now I have continued writing because I guess I found this passion that I absolutely loved. And I really enjoy, I've always loved reading. I'm an avid reader myself. So I love mysteries. I love trying to solve mysteries. I know I write a lot of mystery novels. I really enjoy them. And some of the other novels that I've written, I've just been super inspired by other stories, like Zenique's, for example, the first female graffiti artist in Senegal, Africa. Things like that, I guess, were the choices behind my writing.
Yeah. What was your first novel that you wrote?
So my first novel that I wrote was Une obsession dangereuse, which actually was published by a publishing company. And then I started writing more books and started self-publishing, and it just kind of took off from there.
So Jennifer, I think your first novel was La Chica Nueva.
That's correct, yes.
But this past year, I was teaching the French version of The Jersey, which is Le Maillot, and my Spanish colleague was teaching El Jersey, the Spanish version that you had originally written. And you happened to put on Facebook the week she was reading it with her students, where I believe you were in Guatemala, you put on a selfie that you took of the family you had met that inspired the book. And so I saw this on Facebook and I ran into her classroom and I was like, Rebecca, look, it's Jennifer's inspiration for the book you're reading. And she showed it to her students and everything. So I love hearing these stories of inspiration. I just wanted to share that with you more than anything.
Thank you. The Jersey, don't tell the others, but it's my favorite story. It was inspired by an act of kindness by my best friend's son.
I just love that these stories come from a real place, and that you can tell the authenticity in them. For both of you, you could see that there's a real passion in where your stories come from. Theresa mentioned the book Xenix about the graffiti artist in Senegal, and my students really, for the last couple of years, we've used that, and it's opened up so many conversations about human rights and social justice, and so many of those topics come up in all of your books. So could you talk to us a little bit, and I'll come to you to start for this one, Theresa, in terms of what you are hearing and seeing that teachers are doing with your books, or things you've done on your own that have been really successful and inspirational with your students?
It's just kind of really cool to see how making connections with your students through these readers, pulling them in by how they relate to the characters and the themes that are woven in these very simply written, comprehensible novels. It makes a huge impact, and the students feel successful because they've made that connection.
Yeah, my own personal experience with using them is because they're accessible in a way that you can have topics in your classroom that are not the easiest to bring up. Sometimes they're hard topics. I mean, even in the very level one books of yours, Theresa, the chocolate books, I call them, the chocolate and chocolat books, where it's about bullying in sort of a second, third grade classroom or first grade classroom. They're really young. But even though it's that story, but we can actually then talk about it. And a lot of times what I find is when we're talking about somebody else's story, it's more comfortable for students, and then they can see their own place to get into it. And that's why I've so much appreciated what both of you have brought in terms of what we can do in our classrooms with them. That's just my own little anecdote about it. Let's talk about what it means to plan for using these novels. You can sort of look at it as we're going to read the story, we're going to make sure we understand the story, and then we're going to move on and we're going to do something else. But there's so much more to doing that, right? So, Jennifer, let's start with you with this one. And so, whether we're in the midst of reading the book, we don't have the whole story yet, or we've finished it, what can we be doing with these novels in our classrooms?
Getting that connection with your students is really important from the get-go, right? Making sure that the students are buying in to what you're selling, right? Before you get into the novel. But, picking things out of the novel that interest you. I mean, as the teacher, if you can't sell it to them, they are not going to buy it. Pulling out the culture, pulling out geography. And I mean, we could, if all we ever talked about was geography, we would be doing the whole world a favor, right? But, pulling out those things, science, and having students, look at the story from their own point of view. Okay, well, what do you like? There's something for everybody in the story. So figure out what the thing is that you like. Asking the students that, right? I ask my own students, okay, listen, I know this is a degree requirement for you and you're not really keen on being in Spanish class. Look at what we're talking about, the themes, and how it relates to your course of study here at the university. And I think we could do the same thing at the middle and the high school level, because we've got to get them interested somehow, right? So pulling stuff out of the book that you can continue on doing each day, and having the book be in the background, because understanding every single thing that's going on is not really all that necessary all the time. The key things, sure, but what color shirt that Cooper was wearing on the day he went to the dance is really not that important. Okay, that he went to the dance, important. and teaching students how to read and how to relax into not knowing every single word, but being able to say something about it like you were talking about before. I mean, it's so important to have those conversations, which is, quite frankly, and don't quote me on this, but go ahead, way more important than the language itself.
No, absolutely. That idea of the language, learning the language in our language classrooms, it's sort of a gateway to the other conversations that we can have, and like you were saying, the color of Cooper's t-shirt. Oh, great. It's wonderful that you understood that. But what is the larger part of what it comes down to? Right. So, Theresa, and let's see, I'd like to hear your thoughts on, what we can be doing besides, just simply the reading and understanding of the story in our classrooms.
Jen and I actually just presented in Florida. One of the things that I really put a big emphasis on as a teacher myself of middle and high school French students is I write these novels and use certain ones with my students because I know there are themes within some of them that are going to foster that community and create that discussion and create those connections between the kiddos and the class. I mean, I have students who come in, don't have any classes with a lot of the other kids some of the days, and they're like, well, this is the only day I get to speak or see so-and-so, or, this is the only class that you actually ask us and care what we do or how things connect in our lives. And I'm like, really? I'm the only class? That blows my mind. But I feel that the best thing that we can do as teachers of second language, especially if you're willing to use the readers, is don't look at it as we're opening the book to finish a reader. To get it done, but you're using that as the thread that creates that community in your classroom.
Let's talk about that idea of the threads. I like that, so it's sort of like the thread that's going through the book. And do you look at your stories? This is for either one of you. Do you see your stories as having an obvious thread that you hope, okay, this is the thread that goes through it? Or do you more leave it open to interpretation of what that might be like?
Well, to be quite honest, I said I always have an agenda, right? I have an agenda as my own personal agenda as to what I want to put in the story, because there are things that I want to be available for teachers and students to talk about. But within that, I also add just little breadcrumbs so that teachers can pull on that thread if they want. Sorry, I'm mixing metaphors here. If they want to pull on that thread if they want, or they can leave it alone. So there's a history or social issues, economic issues, touchy subjects that some teachers are not yet willing to discuss, but they're there, and so you read about them. But if the teacher doesn't choose to focus on them, then it's okay. The student still gets the information. So yes, I have an agenda, and I usually, I'm thinking it more about, it's always a people story for me. It's a character study, and how does this relate to other people in the world? Because that's what's going to help us as human beings and humanity-wise, more than learning a language. We just need to be able to connect with other people, and that's what I hope that happens through my novels.
Yeah, one of my, I don't think it's a downfall, but I'll say it is for me as a teacher using these novels is every time there's a thread, I pull on it. And so I will say, for example, Theresa, in your La Leçon de Chocolat, so in this particular level 1 reader, there's a 6-year-old student who has to do a report on chocolate, and he's in Belgium. And it's about Belgian chocolate. And so I pulled on that thread, and I ended up doing an almost 2-week unit on where the cacao beans actually come from. And we did this whole research into the cacao beans that are used to make this beautiful chocolate come from Côte d'Ivoire. And in Côte d'Ivoire, nobody actually has chocolate because it's all exported. Now let's look at the conditions of the people, And so that's the type of thing that if you tried to put that in the level 1 story, how would you make that totally comprehensible? But it was a thread, it was a breadcrumb. It was like, we can actually jump into this. So whether or not that was an intended breadcrumb in your story, Theresa, I was just sort of, let's jump in, let's do more with it.
I think that's great. And I think the beauty of the CI readers is everybody's always like, oh, is this a level 1? Is this a level 2? That's a level 1 book, Joshua, but you can take that level 1 book with your my French 4 class and go into all that history.
En français.
Yes, absolutely. Absolutely. Right. Are you, either of you can answer this in terms of ideas or stories that you're thinking of right now? And you don't have to give them away because we don't want, people to take your ideas and write the story for you. But, do you, I guess it's more a question of where's the inspiration for your next story going to come from? So I'll ask you, Theresa, like if you plan on continue writing, like where does that next story idea come from for you?
It's funny. It always comes from different things. My next story, the inspiration came from my cat. So it's a children's book. It'll be an illustrated children's book, level 1, just a random story I came up with that my cat inspired me to write. And then I know Jen and I are co-authoring a book as well about birds. I don't want to give away too much. Another children's illustrated book. So those are the things in the works. And I know Jen has some other things going on.
Yeah. What's going on for you, Jennifer?
I have a story about farming coming up that I'm still working on. I have a story that I'm still working on. It's been years about Buenaventura, Colombia. I'm doing the bird book with Terry. I also wrote a children's story book about a dog in Guatemala. I have 2 plays in the works, level 1 plays.
That's excellent. I like the idea of writing a play because we have a number of these sort of CI novels now, and it's another way of looking at it, and they do need to learn to read plays. So I've also noticed you have another collaborative project going on, your new website, Digilangua, which is digital versions of your CI novels, right? So can you tell us about what that's all about, what that looks like for teachers?
When we had the shutdown from COVID, teachers weren't allowed to use physical books in the classroom. So I said to Jen, I have an idea. Why don't we try to get our books on some type of digital platform so that teachers will have access to the readers, and we could add the audio and give them another option. So Digilangua grew from the COVID shutdown.
Yeah, and you have something like over 170 books on there now?
Yeah, so with Jen's books in all 5 languages, Spanish, French, German, Italian, and English, as well as all of my CI readers combined, we have over 170 readers.
And the audio piece, that's so important. I have to say, having the audio has been so useful for my own students, because I use Google Classroom. And so whenever they have to read a chapter, I always put the audio on Google Classroom for them. And I tell them, you actually have to read it with the audio because it means they can't stop when they don't understand a word. And they have to the first time. And it takes like 2 or 3 minutes sometimes, right? And they get to the end, and I'm like, if you understood the chapter when you get to the end, don't go back and listen again. Don't even go back and read it again. But by using the audio, it has just kind of forced you just have to keep going. Don't press pause. And they're amazed when they get to the end that they actually understand it.
Oh, that's great. That's a good tip too. That just to remind students that they don't need to know every single word.
Yeah, that had come out of an article that I read, and it was about teachers reading out loud to their students. And it wasn't necessarily world language teachers, but sort of in elementary classes, that teachers reading out loud to students as they were reading trained them and not having to stop at words that they didn't understand. And I said, I'm going to start doing this. So I would read in the classroom, and I'd say, I'm not going to stop. We're just going to read at a normal pace. And we get to the end, and they were like, yeah, we actually understood it. Even though there were maybe 17 words I didn't understand, the gist of it I got. And so when I saw that there are a lot of these audio versions of the CI readers out there, I was like, okay, I definitely have to get these and make those available for students. And some of them will listen to it and not read it because they actually understand it better, so depends on the need. It's differentiation.
That's great. And that was why we wanted to offer both.
And I use it with my students, offer them the audio. And when they come in and say, I didn't do the reading, I said it was 3 minutes and 48 seconds to listen to. Really? Come on now.
Yes. Well, that's when you tell them, if you read it on your own and you get on the struggle bus the whole time and you have to understand everything, it takes you 25 minutes. But if you just listen to the audio and read it, it'll take you less than 4 minutes and you'll understand it. It's a win-win. The fact that there's, actual research behind it, even better, so that works out really well. So now I'm interested in some recommendations you might have for teachers. So Theresa, I'll start with you. Any recommendations for teachers in terms of, getting started with CI novels if they haven't done it before, or some new ways of looking at it if they are?
Well, yeah, I mean, they could visit our DigiLingua site, which we actually offer a free 1-week trial. They can jump on there. They can read through any books that they want. It's really just a nice way to glimpse through and get an idea of what some of the themes are in these books. And the beautiful part about the site that Jen and I really wanted to make sure we put on DigiLingua was making sure that teachers could filter the books by level, theme, and language. So if you're looking, you're a teacher and you're like, I want to try to start a class novel. I've never taught one, but I want to make sure it's on family and community. Or maybe you have to hit the certain AP themes as with readers. We structured our filter on DigiLingua by those themes.
And just to clarify, to make sure I'm understanding it correctly, that if a teacher signs up for an account for the year, they have access to all of the books within the account for all of their students for the year. And so they can assign out different books throughout the year. Is my understanding that correctly?
Correct.
I think that's also a benefit for, if you have some high flyers in class and and they zip through the books, teachers can individually give them access to the same stories in other languages. So they could, broaden their horizons even more if they wanted to. Also, if you have some English language learners that happen to be in your classes, you could give them this access to the books in their native language or their heritage language and in English as well. So, there's a lot of things, differentiation that can go with this online platform.
And there's also a way to do activities or assessments as well?
Yes. So teachers on the platform have the ability to go in and create any type of multiple choice, like question. It can be any type of multiple choice question or an open-ended question if they would like. And also assign it to students in their created classes. And we left it open-ended for the teachers because we didn't want to I know some teachers like their questions in English for their novices and not in the target language that they're teaching. So we left it open-ended so that the teacher can create it in whichever way that they feel fit for their students.
I'll make sure that they are all in the show notes so we can go right there. So how can our listeners be connecting with both of you? So I'll start with you, Jennifer. How can we do that?
Well, I seem to be all over the internet. Puenteslanguage.com is my own personal website. I'm on Facebook. I have an account there, on Instagram, Twitter, LinkedIn.
I will make sure it's all linked in the show notes so we can get to you, right? So Theresa, how can we be reaching out to you?
So I can be found at compellinglanguagecorner.com, my website. Again, like Jennifer, I have Facebook, Compelling Language Corner, and Instagram as well.
I always like to leave our listeners with a hearty piece of advice at the end. And I often hear from listeners that this is the part they remember because it's right at the end, Who would like to take this to start out talking about advice? Theresa, let's hear from you first.
Okay, yes. My big piece of advice is get your students reading now if they haven't been reading in your language classroom, world language classroom, and make sure students are somehow reading every day. It does not have to be reading a book a day, but reading a paragraph, reading a handout, reading something in the target language to make them used to reading.
Anything to add to that, Jennifer?
I would say that with second language teaching and learning by the students, the only wrong way to teach reading is just to hand it to the students. I think that we really need to help them through the whole process and teach them how to read. Reading's not going on a lot in general these days, so if we can reinforce the same skills that the English language arts teachers are doing, for example, isn't that a bonus for everybody? I mean, we do not need to reinvent the wheel.
I appreciate your mentioning there about supporting the skills that are happening in other classes, because it's literacy skills. Thank you for being here, for sharing everything that you do, and for really giving teachers, and I'll speak like personally for myself, like language, as they say, thank you for what you have given me the ability to do with my students, and to give compelling content to them and to make me excited to go in my classroom with your stories. So thank you from me as well as from my students.
Thank you so much for having us. And a big shout out to you too, Joshua. You are a tremendous asset to this community. And we couldn't do it without all of your instruction and contributions. So that's from me. And I thank you right back.
What are your takeaways from that conversation with Jennifer Degenhardt and Theresa Marrama? I hope you're feeling inspired to use stories and novels with your students. As you can see, I'm a big proponent of using them myself. Be sure to check out the show notes to connect with Jennifer and Theresa. You'll also see a link to sign up for Talking Points, my weekly email newsletter with tips and resources for language teaching. There are also links to get in touch with me if you'd like to work together. We can either do that in person in your school or remotely. I will talk to you soon. Bye for now. Thank you for listening to the World Language Classroom podcast. Be sure to follow or subscribe wherever you're listening so that you never miss an episode. Let's keep the conversation going on social media. Connect with me on X, aka Twitter, Facebook, and Instagram at WL Classroom. And for even more valuable resources, visit my website, WLClassroom.com, where you'll find over 300 blog posts about language teaching. So stay inspired, keep growing, and continue making a difference in your language classroom.